Maybe a little bit more about some of the nation states. I think a lot of people are still wondering, with what's all going on in the political world today, do we need to worry more about nation states and cyber attacks, or are we better prepared for that now? What are your thoughts there?
Well, yes and no, right? So I kind of like come at this both ways. I'd say that if you looked at the numerical kind of lineup, you'd find that nation states are typically associated with about 15%, slightly less than 15% of the attacks that kind of show up as being notorious enough that more than the victim kind of says, I'm interested in that. That means that about 85% is kind of attributable to criminal attacks, and maybe a 1% or so are ideologues, hacktivists, that crowd. But the 15% can be quite consequential, very impactful. Think of the year 2017 when in the spring, the North Korean nation state mounted something called WannaCry, did a lot of damage, particularly to kind of widespread networks that had not patched. There was a particular threat, knew how to actually take advantage of an unpatched system, and the national health system in the United Kingdom had not patched any of their systems, and they all went down hard. And there was a moment when you couldn't actually understand which doctor was going to see which patient, what hospital room was aligned with what. That was a nation state that did that, had a huge consequence, perhaps elevated far more than what some criminal attacks that very day might have been. Later that year, in the summer, there was something called NotPetya, which was mounted by the Russian nation state. It was intended to be an attack on the Ukrainian infrastructure, but it wasn't well designed. It got away from them, and it then wormed its way across Europe and the rest of the world. And it brought institutions like Maersk, the shipping lines, down hard, kind of portions of an institution, FedEx, its logistics system in Europe down hard. And I think we all stood back and said, wow, nation states are only 15% of the whole. It's pretty impactful. And you don't need to be the target to be the victim, right? And so those two things lined up to say maybe we should put them at front and center and bring the full resources of governments and the private sector to bear to figure out how do we actually deter them? How do we kind of interdict them when they're kind of engaged in that? How do we actually box them and evict them in the kind of shortest possible order?